So it has something to do with perhaps a general anxiety of making meaning in a time that seems meaningless or maybe even timeless.
So, how does our nostalgia for the past influence our dreams for the future, influence our psychology, our life, and politics in the present? And I'm particularly conscious of this at a time where our nostalgia of the past seems to correlate with a growing populism across Europe. On one hand, you have a nostalgia for a whiter, more homogenous, largely male artistic output, and in absolutely correlation, no doubt, with no explanatory variable, a rise in populist, far right, fascistic groups and thinking. Grafton, is there any connection there?
Yeah, totally. And the thing is most psychological research on nostalgia indicates that it's a pro-social emotion, it's healthy, it enables good feelings, it builds communities. And the crazy thing is that doesn't seem to square with the way that we see nostalgia in politics, maybe, which is the Make America Great Again sort of thing, at least here in the United States. And I think that's because nostalgia might be really a powerful emotion at bringing people together, but it might bring them together over not so good commonalities, terrible commonalities like shared, anti-immigrant or racist sentiment or anti-transgender sentiment or something. But the thing is we can't cure nostalgia out of people. And politicians know this, and this is why they use it along with anger and fear and a number of other emotions in order to mobilize groups of people and divide and conquer, so to speak. And the right wing has been really good recently at not really relying so much on hope for a future, but perhaps a nostalgia for a utopia in the past, or what Zygmunt Bauman might have called a retrotopia. So there is a weird disconnect in that if you look just at the psychological literature, it looks like it's a great emotion, nothing wrong with it. But obviously, like any emotion, it can be weaponized towards dangerous and destructive ends.
Stuart, would you make a distinction based off what Grafton's been saying between nostalgia within and how that's instrumentalized by some in politics and nostalgia within the artistic?
Yeah, so I've certainly seen it in politics, and just going to be open about it. I've seen the Tory party use a lot of. I'm very tuned into imagery, and I've seen a lot of this sort of patriotic, warlike, back to the 1940s, get together, nuclear families type stuff. And it raises alarm bells with me massively. So, yeah, I totally get what Grafton's saying, and I completely agree. In the arts, not so much so. I mean, every now and then there's a kind of thing where we bang on, oh, abstraction was great. Everyone's making abstract paintings. No, they weren't. Figurative paintings are back at, and we have this argument all the time. But I still think, fundamentally within the arts, you still have your greats. David Bowie is always going to be great. Like, we can just agree that. It's a fact. And it's a different thing.
But if we keep listening to David Bowie, do we stop making space for the new David Bowies who might be coming
Well, absolutely not, because if we listen to David Bowie a lot, we'll probably make better music because you can learn a lot from him.
Yeah, that's not the issue. It's not the issue that just listening to it is suddenly going to keep us stuck in the past. I mean, I think that some of this issue with like the classics, feeling them like their towering presence press on us from the past, has a little bit less to do with like they don't make good art anymore, and has a little bit more to do with what was identified 30 years ago by this anthropologist named Marc Augé about this crisis in making meaning. That everything now has to have some kind of meaning. There has to be sort of a grand response out of lots of people who can then like give their opinion on it, and this is how we think it was back in the old days with the wars and the great works, and now there seems to be this panic like, well, where's the next great big thing? And like Mark Fisher said, if it happened long ago, how long ago was it? And did we miss it? So it has something to do with perhaps a general anxiety of making meaning in a time that seems meaningless or maybe even timeless.
Jenny, do you want to come in here on our nostalgia of the past and how it's influencing current psychology and politics?
We went through Brexit, which I found probably the most bizarre thing politically that ever happened in my lifetime, because I did look back to the 70s when we joined the European Union, and I was a post-war baby who remembered standing in my grandmother's bay window in the bedroom and my mother describing to me how she had stood there during the war and watched Sheffield burn because it had been so badly bombed. And that image stood with me right the way through my childhood, my teenage, and into my early 20s, which is what I was when we finally did join the European Union. And that felt to me something to be, as I got into my late 60s, when the whole Brexit debate started, that was something to be powerfully nostalgic about, that feeling of coming. I was in France, actually, when it happened, because my degree was in French. And I came back and wanted to buy fish and chips, as one tends to when one comes to England from abroad. And I had money in my hand, which was my own country's currency, and I didn't know what to do with it. I was told it was 65 pence, and I just handed it over as if I were in a foreign country, but it felt so special that we had now gone decimal. We were just like everybody in Europe, and we were not going to fight anymore. There wasn't going to be another war, and that was so precious to me. And I am now very, very nostalgic for that period and that feeling of being part of something bigger, something valuable, something where we could travel, where we could be part of Europe and not just this tight little island.
There might be a few people feeling nostalgic for when you didn't need a visa to go to France for more than 3 months at a time. I do want to push a little bit more on this question of the nostalgia and the extent to which the nostalgia that we have for past artistic works can serve to idealize certain eras. So is there ever a risk that our idealization of certain artistic greats can lead to the perception that those are the only true barometers of that culture's output? And what I mean by that is, you know, for example, think of your school curriculum and the books that end up being the classics, right? And the struggles that some teachers have in trying to say, well, you know, we need a few new names on the classic list, maybe to recognize that actually there have been a whole load of new authors who've come through who produced extraordinary work. In holding on to only a certain vision of what the classics are constituted by, we maintain a vision of who we are as a nation. So, I mean, is there something about the artists that we consider to be classics, which is in itself a nostalgia that we don't want to admit for a past that was maybe less contested?
Well, I think the problem there is just with how history's been reported. You know, I think history's been misappropriated. You know, we look at abstract expressionism as a movement, and there's no women, and then the Royal Academy don't do the amazing show that I managed to see in America of female abstract expressionists, right, that were working at the time. And you know, we need to address that. But that's the problem with historicizing the past and the way that the past is regurgitated. When we're talking about nostalgia, I actually think it's something a bit different. It's actually about an emotional sense of meaning that can be ported into the present moment. And that's a totally different thing. And to Grafton's point, that gives the artist a utility, something that we can build upon. We already understand, we know what it meant, you know, but the problem is that emotionally we say the 60s and, you know, we picture the miniskirt, all the rest of it, and you get these historic bubbles, but there's nothing to stop us reinterpreting them and adding to them. But that's a job for the history teachers.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.